Hello, everybody. Joe Ridholm, Quirks editor, back again. Thanks for being with us. Next up, we've got Canvs and LRW, who will tell us about innovating shopper experience research, using AI-assisted linguistic coding. And our first speaker is Jared Feldman. Take it away, Jared.
Great. Thanks so much, Joe. Appreciate it. Thanks for having us. We're super excited to share the virtual stage today with our partners at LRW. And we're going to be discussing a recent innovative shopper experience project with the one and only flagship energy drink brand, Red Bull. So by way of introduction, my name is Jared Feldman. I'm the founder and CEO at Canvs, and I'm joined here today with Lauren Murphy, who is Director, Research Scientist, and an esteemed member of LRW's Pragmatic Brain Science team. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely, happy to be here.
So the Pragmatic Brain Science team is actually even cooler than it sounds. Would love to start things off just to give folks a little bit of background about what you're up to at the PBS team.
Absolutely. So first, let me just kind of tell you a little bit about LRW if you're not familiar with us. So we're a global marketing services firm, and we really specialize in bringing deep human understanding and sophisticated analytics to a wide range of research problems. So we range from things that are super tactical to thought leadership work and really everything in between. What I think makes LRW really special, and I might be a little bit biased, is that we have this pragmatic brain science team. And we are essentially the behavioral science division of the company. And all of the members of the team have backgrounds in academics across different sciences like psychology, biology, and neuroscience. And we really function as internal consultants to the business partners that work directly with the clients. And I think this is really great and really unique because rather than being a specific division that only does behavioral science work, we're actually able to touch a wider range of studies and ensure that that all-important human understanding really exists in all of our work. So today we're going to talk a little bit about one of the ways that we do this and the ways that we bring that deep human understanding, and that's through listening to the voice of the consumer through open-ended responses. So I'm sure many of you are very familiar with some of the challenges that come with working with large amounts of open-ended data. And that, kind of wrangling some of this information in a really time-efficient manner can actually be really challenging. And so this is where our partners over at Canvs come in.
Thanks, Lauren. So at Canvs, broadly, our mission is to try to make the world more empathetic. And how we do this is by leveraging patented AI technology that can ingest large amounts of short-form text, unstructured, messy language, however people choose to express themselves, and quantify how people are feeling and why they're feeling that way. The crux of the technology is dealing with modern dialogue and what we call unnatural language processing, because nobody speaks properly, period, certainly when we're answering our surveys. And we're doing all of this to try to provide deeper levels of insight into the consumer mindset and really get underneath the psychological underpinnings of human behavior, which is emotion. So that's a little bit about us and some background on LRW and the Pragmatic Brain Science team. Now, everyone's here today to talk about a really exciting case study that we collaborated on for Red Bull, where they were able to uncover unexpected insights into the consumer shopping experience. So today we're going to discuss the problem that needed to be addressed, the tools, support the right qualitative responses, the methodologies and trends that emerge, and then ultimately and most importantly, the business improvements that Red Bull was able to make because of the data. And then, of course, we'll wrap with a few key takeaways so that hopefully all of you can feel empowered to implement these processes in your own day-to-day immediately. Now, in this virtual environment, we do want to make sure that there's time for Q&A. So there's a chat function that many of you have likely used already. What you can do is over the course of our case study today, please feel free to submit questions as they arise. And then at the end, we'll save a few minutes and we'll work through them and make sure that we address whatever's top of mind for you. So with that, would love to jump right in. Lauren, I'd love to pass to you to talk a little bit about what got this study started.
Absolutely. So today we're going to be talking about shopping, and I feel like shopping and especially grocery shopping has been a really big topic recently. And so even though shopping can sometimes feel like a bit of a mundane and routine task, there's actually a lot of emotion that goes into the process of shopping at a grocery retailer. And that's not just true in the middle of a global pandemic. So there's a lot of decisions that we need to make when we're shopping. There's lots of items on our list that we have to remember. And there's lots of kind of social norms and situations that we have to continuously navigate. And when you put those together, it can actually be a pretty cognitively demanding and sometimes draining experience. So retailers know this, and they understand that strategies for making this experience simpler and easier on us is going to open up the opportunity for consumers to be less stressed, take that opportunity to potentially explore new products, increase their spend, or increase their loyalty with the retailer. So we actually teamed up with Red Bull for this study to help them test and refine both really tactical strategies, but grounded within this overarching goal of understanding the consumer mindset when shopping for energy drinks and how we best optimize this experience. So this research really helps Red Bull to strengthen their relationships with the different retailers, and everyone's working towards the similar goal of achieving higher revenue and happier customers. In addition, as Jared mentioned earlier, Red Bull is really a beacon in the category. So it's an energy drink that even non-Red Bull drinkers look for when they're trying to locate the category. So placement within each retailer is really critical. In this same vein, it's really important for us to understand not just the generic experience of shopping for energy drinks, but to understand how that experience differs by different retail type and what that really means for our strategy. So we asked consumers about shopping in grocery, in convenience stores, and in mass merchandisers. And then some of the metrics that were included in this, as I alluded to, there's kind of some really tactical objectives of optimizing shelf sets and display types that used really innovative approaches. But today we're going to really focus on the approaches used to capture the voice of the consumer. So we did this using an open-ended response and conducting sophisticated analysis on these responses. And we wanted to note that many studies do include open ends for data quality reasons. So it's great for bot detection, and it's also great to get unprompted top-of-mind responses. But we really have an approach that we want to ask open-ended questions that are truly open and really get to hear all about the consumer experience. Of course, there's great variability in the type of responses that you get, but we really find that using techniques that build on consumer behavior and build on our natural desire to tell stories help us really mine this really rich information and data and bring that consumer experience to life.
So when you ask those open ends, folks are saying whatever they want to you. They're talking about their experiences, they're sharing how they feel. I'd love if you could jump into the framework that you use to understand those open-ended responses.
Absolutely. So as we mentioned earlier, we know that emotion has a huge impact on consumer behavior and on the decisions that we make. It's really infused in all of the decisions that we're making, even to a really small level. So the framework that we use when understanding emotion and how that's impacting behavior is called the emotion circumflex. And so this looks at an emotion not just on a positive to negative axis, but also includes this activation axis. So this is kind of how arousing or emotionally exciting each emotion is. And we know from academic research that high activation emotions are the ones that are most likely to drive us to action. So if you see here high anger, that's something that you would want to remove that feeling, and people are going to take actions and do certain behaviors in order to negate that feeling. So when we do our linguistic coding analysis, we first look at the emotions that are naturally being expressed by consumers, and then we cross-reference those with the topics that come up when they're expressing each of those emotions. And then lastly, we'll cross that with whatever subgroups we're interested in this case, the type of retail channel that each consumer is shopping. And so one of the reasons that we've really partnered with Canvs and why we have such a great relationship with them is their dedication to not just doing sentiment, like positive and negative analysis, but automatically capturing a wider range of emotions that allows us to quickly generate the insights that are really important to us for these studies. And Jared, if you want to tell us a little bit more about how that's done and what we found in the study.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lauren. As Lauren talked about, there's this multidimensional nature to emotion that's really critical, and it goes way beyond general positive, negative tonality that we are often in our work broadly overfitting complex language and emotion into binary buckets. And so it's our belief that positive and negative is actually not a great way to think about language. It's a better way to think about your operational data. Did this drive sales? Did this ultimately have the behavioral impact that you care about? So let's dive into this survey itself and the results for Red Bull, and ultimately how we can observe how people were feeling, why they were feeling that way, and ultimately in what context it was true for. What you're looking at in front of you is the actual open end. The spirit of it is walk us through your most recent shopping experience. No prompting or guidance in any way of what the responses would be, but truly leaving the question open, and open end, as Lauren puts it. And you can see actually overwhelmingly people are having enjoyable experiences while shopping. We're looking at about 92% of responses were expressing some form of enjoyment. Now, one of the things that Canvs is doing is it's categorizing the open ends, it's summarizing what people are feeling, and it's organizing it into, in this case, the Paul Ekman emotion framework of 6 core emotions. We give the researcher control over what framework they'd like to use. Here, we're summarizing in the broadest strokes possible, effectively, how these 2,800 or so responses were feeling. And because anger, especially, is such a high arousal state, and therefore more likely to incentivize some sort of action, it's really key to always double click on when people are upset about something. So in this case, we've got a small set of respondents that are expressing anger, which LRW knew to zero in on to determine why they were unhappy. But when you get results like this, you may ask yourself, well, why even focus on a category that seems to be such a small subset? In organizing data this way, and in literally double clicking there, we actually found that over half of the responses in anger were expressing it about their mass merch shopping experience. And so because one of the things we're trying to understand is the differences in the consumer mindset and their experiences amongst the retail shopping experience, this became really important to double click on. And an area where if we can determine why they're feeling that way, well, that could inform changes that the brand can make in the future. Now, when I'm talking about anger, it may mean something a little bit different to Canvs than it does to you. At a high level, we're using the term anger to describe lots of language like anger, not necessarily saying I'm very angry right now. Things like hate, dislike, annoyance, basically things that generally make us uncomfortable in some form. And although we did definitely see some consumers speaking in expletives, we know that there are lots of ways in which that anger can be expressed. Now, if you're relegated to using manual means of coding, that becomes exhausting and is in part what makes manual coding so arduous of a process. But using technology in an effort to summarize the ways in which people express this, and to do so algorithmically, it becomes very empowering. So what I want to do quickly is add just some texture to what enjoyment means and what anger means, since these are some key areas. First, what makes the consumer shopping experience enjoyable? At a high level, what you can see right now is just a couple of choice verbatims where folks talk about their good experiences. People have enjoyable experiences when they can have a simple and easy trip to the store. Things are easy to find and in stock, and they get a good deal on it. Fairly straightforward, confirmatory, simple. But what we do then is we want to add some color to what makes consumers angry, and when they talk about their experiences in that open end. And this is really where the trend starts to emerge, where consumers, especially right now, are very focused on getting in and getting out as quickly as possible. And those that were unable to do so expressed anger. My favorite quote here, just, who doesn't love a good quote? I hate shopping so many people and hardly any lines open. I am not going to use the self-checkout. They don't pay me to work. Some really colorful examples just by asking an open end. Now, one of the things that Lauren mentioned and is really critical is not just understanding how people feel, but what was the stimulus for it. And in that way, and through that lens, it becomes something that we can then action. So in looking at broadly that anger emotion across all of those responses, we want to zero in first into the type of shopping store that resulted in the most anger. And what you're seeing here in front of you is a clear sense that mass merch stores elicited the highest amount of anger from respondents, about 1.5 times more than grocery stores and 3 times more than convenience stores. So Lauren, when you see these sorts of results and clearly big differences by retail channel, what does this data say to you?
Yeah, I think these are really important findings, because when we see something like this, we know that it's not something about shopping in general, that shopping in general has certain frustrating and angering points, because it is biased towards one type of retailer. We know that there's something that's going on that's interacting with the overall shopping experience that's causing some people to have a really frustrating time. And that tells us, when we're trying to optimize, our recommendations for what types of strategy the brand needs to adopt, there may be no one-size-fit-all approach, and that we need to think of mass merch a little bit differently than we think about grocery and convenience.
Absolutely. So the one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work in this context, because the consumer mindset and the consumer experience is so different by channel. Now, one of the things you touched on and is really important is what's driving that anger. That starts to become actionable. And so I want to zero in one step further, and we're going to look at the mass merch shopping experience, and specifically what is driving anger amongst consumers. And the long short is that it's crowds. And this is where we're able to provide actionable insights to the Red Bull team, not just measuring the emotion, but understanding what the emotion is about is what makes it actionable. So we can now understand it's important to people to make shopping amongst crowds of people as easy as possible. And so the LRW team is then able to come in and provide specific strategies that Red Bull might be able to utilize to improve the consumer experience. So to that end, Lauren, once you arrived at these conclusions, what types of actions were you able to recommend to Red Bull to take advantage of these findings?
Absolutely. So we have some of the data from the other aspects of the study, and we want to fuse those findings with what we've found from our open-end analysis. So in order to make this as effective and actionable as possible, we needed to make sure that we were considering how those high arousal negative emotions are actually going to change people's behaviors. So we fused this with our recommendations for the rest of the display types and the store facings in order to augment those approaches with some additional displays for mass merch retailers. So these include things like non-aisle displays and end caps to help facilitate consumers to get in and get what they need, even when the aisle may be particularly busy or crowded. And I think this really reinforces the idea that if we're only asking consumers about an ideal situation, like looking at, like a perfectly set shelf set, we might be missing part of that actual shopping experience. But fortunately, our client and our team all recognize the importance of context and understanding the actual emotional experience of shopping and how that impacts the buying behavior. One piece that we wanted to mention, kind of super relevant right now, is that this study was conducted prior to coronavirus. So crowds are a little bit of a different emotional trigger right now. There may be fewer crowds in some stores because they're limiting people's access due to social distancing. But one would argue that the emotional experience of shopping in a store may be even more high arousal and even more negative at the moment. Just as people are, super stressed and trying to be able to get in and get what they need really efficiently, and that by facilitating that experience, we're really improving their experience and increasing their loyalty for the brand, both the retailer and the Red Bull brand. So these findings in the end, they really not only influenced Red Bull's strategies for how they want to set up their shelf displays and what they're going to send off to their retailers, but they also helped to demonstrate the importance of this beacon brand for the retailers and helped present opportunities to get more facings and more opportunities to argue for more space on those shelves so that we could really facilitate consumers' needs and help them get exactly what they want. So to kind of wrap all of this together, I think we've all had an experience of kind of getting to the end of a project and analyzing the data and wishing you could go back in time and you added, another question or another data point to really round out those findings. And separately, we've seen a lot of studies that are using these open ends for data quality and don't end up actually kind of leveraging those responses to get really rich consumer perspectives. So we recommend, including these thoughtful open ends from the start, so that you're able to really add value to your study and ensure that you're really capturing the consumer perspective and hearing from their experience in their own words. And then by partnering with Canvs, we're able to really bring speed and agility to this process and to analyzing the open ends so that we can help facilitate these comprehensive recommendations and really make a huge difference for our clients.
Right, and so tactically too, just to close the loop on this, Lauren, you mentioned this earlier, but the open ends really do serve as a really fast, powerful way to quality control and to weed out responses that generally aren't helpful. And while historically that's been a fairly manual process, you can now leverage technology to quickly identify non-answers, likely spam, folks that are answering without sort of good intention to actually give you a good response. And so there's lots of tactical opportunity to arrive much more quickly at the moment where you as a researcher get to decide what the data means and storytell and connect dots and really make an evidence-based recommendation or decision, which is really the point of research. And also, we spent a lot of time in this work talking about emotion and how important emotion is. We find that most researchers, when they have their open ends, are very, very focused on topics, which are important. Are people talking about the selection or the pricing or the crowd, certainly. But what we want to encourage is to look emotionally at the data and to understand not just what people are talking about, but how they feel about those things. because the more intensely we feel towards these topics, the more likely we are to take action, and the closer you should pay attention to it. So with that, I know we've covered a lot and touched on some key takeaways here. We just have a few minutes left. I wanted to make sure we left a couple of moments for questions. Hopefully, if you've had a thought pop up that you'd love us to answer, you've used the chat, and we'll do the best we can to address it. And in the meantime, if you're curious and you want to learn more about the Pragmatic Brain Science team, definitely head over to lrwonline.com and learn more there. And if you'd like to see the Canvs technology work on your own surveys, you can sign up for a really simple, easy free trial at surveys.canvs.ai. All right, so the moment of truth. Allison, do we have questions from the audience that we can answer?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Lauren and Jared. What an incredible presentation. We've got a few questions. My first one's going to go to you, Lauren. When you asked for open ends and didn't include specific prompts, did you find that any consumers had trouble recalling their experiences?
That's a great question. So I think this really speaks to not just the content that we're asking for in the open end and that we're prompting them with, but to the way that we're structuring the rest of the survey and the things that come before that question. So a lot of times we make sure that we're walking the consumer through that experience, making sure that they're answering some questions about what they've done recently, and that we've really grounded them in that moment, and asking them, from that perspective, once they've already kind of been prompted and had a little bit of an opportunity to think deeply about what they've done, then we can ask that really open end and get it in their own words, rather than having being limited to just kind of closed-ended responses, and really opening it up to hear everything from their perspective.
Awesome. And kind of building on that question, I guess, Jared, for you, although I know it's encouraged to ask open ends, what other types of questions can the Canvas methodology be applied to, and how exactly does that work?
Yeah, great question. So the open ends as a concept is great in that we're asking respondents to just describe their experience, and then we get to observe what happens naturally and organically in the consumer mindset. Generally, though, the open ends are paired with close ends, right? Where we see them used often in NPS studies. Why did you respond that way? The why type questions are great to understand the mindset. How would you describe to friends, that sort of thing. There's certainly more straightforward questions like, name your favorite brand, etc. But what we're trying to encourage is that you can replace typically lots of close ends with one open end. In many cases, instead of saying, tell us about your favorite thing about the commercial, and then your least favorite thing about the commercial, you can ask the question, how did you feel about the commercial? And it enables a much more genuine, free-flowing dialogue from respondents that you can then analyze through these lenses.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got time for about one more question, so I'll open this up to both of you. Maybe Lauren, you can go first. How can you go about deciding which consumer pain points will impact the likelihood to return for shoppers?
That's a great question. So within, from our perspective, from kind of the pragmatic brain science side and from the kind of psychology of emotions, we really look at those things that are most likely to drive action. So not just kind of, a low arousal, slightly neutral negative emotion, like something like, I'm unhappy. That's less likely to actually cause someone to change their behavior. Whereas something that is really high arousal and is causing that, actual real pain and stress to our consumers, those are the types of things that we want to zero in on first and prioritize, so that we make sure that we take care of those issues and transfer those over into that positive realm. Yes, and then kind of adopt other strategies so that we can move everything in a positive direction, but having that additional information helps us zero in on exactly how to strategize that.
Yeah, and I'll just add to echo that point. There's also an asymmetric insight here of sorts, where positive generally is a broad term that includes lots of different types of language and feeling, of course. One of the things that we found in our work is that the presence of, for example, folks just saying something's interesting, or they like it, versus someone saying, "Oh my God, I can't live without it." There's a clear difference in the arousal, the intensity, the passion that they're exhibiting, but also ultimately the behavioral data, whether or not they actually take the action that you're hoping for, or be loyal, or come back, or tune in, or buy the product. And so it's not just, this is why the dimensions we're talking about of having more nuance and understanding of not just positive or negative, but how intensely did they feel, is really, really critical to look at. And the respondents are giving it to you. It's all there in the data you already have, which is exciting.
Okay, well, I have to hop on here. Thank you very much, everybody. That was fascinating. We've got just a few minutes here before our final session, so grab a drink, stretch your legs, and we'll see you back here in a few.